Hello. In the Crown of Aragon 639 years ago, it was June 20th, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico, and this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Multcara Compagnona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. Let's begin today's document. Today's document is from the Curiae Sigilli Secreti Register from Violant. So this is another secret seal level. It's having to do with documents of her court. And again, I think it's just going to remain a mystery to me about why something that seems to be like written by her counselors in her court, like yesterday's document, is not in the Curiae Sigilli Secreti. It's in just the Sigilli Secreti, and then this one today is in the Curiae Sigilli Secreti. If you had asked me what, based on the topics of yesterday's episode and today's, yesterday's being a property transaction in these towns in Aragon, and then today a letter to kind of good tidings, routine letter to the King of Castile, I would have flipped them. I would have said, okay, it's most likely that the transaction in Aragon is a court document, really just from the counselors. Maybe Violant wasn't even involved that much. And then the document to the King of Castile would be more of Violant's direct involvement, and that would be in the Sigilli Secreti without the Curiae. And it's the opposite. So, hey, I don't know. So, yeah, I mentioned the addressee of today's document is the King of Castile. And this document really is one in which Violant is celebrating something that she has heard from the King of Castile. I think that in other letters she would have said, oh, it's good news from you, that's great. But here we have, I think, a little bit more of an umph, because at the end of line 4 we've got the Buenas Nuevas in Castilian. Okay, so this whole document is in Castilian. And so there's this good news and it's que de la vostra gracia nos facios. Well, okay, a saber. So she's found out something, right? And she's saying this is really good news. And what is she found out? I think by this time, getting to the end of June of 1387, the attempt by John of Gaunt to invade Castile was defeated. Now, I'm not exactly sure that timeline, but there's something else in the apparatus of this document that leads me to think that had happened by June 20th, that the defeat of John of Gaunt had taken place. Because look at how this is addressed in the addressee line at the bottom. Al rey de Castilla, de León y de Portugal. Yeah. So, no, Castile did not conquer Portugal. Portugal was still very much its own kingdom. And this is, I think, a bit of a celebratory flourish here. I mean, I'm sure, all the time, like, people are claiming that they're kings of something when it's in name only. Like, we had a letter to, I think, Maria of Sicily, who's called the Queen of Jerusalem. So, and then, of course, the the little boy at this time, but eventually the guy that Joan and Violant's daughter marries. So Yolanda of Aragon marries Louis II of Anjou, and he calls himself the King of Naples, even though he never had any kind of political control over Naples. So, this is not anything radical or unusual going on here, but it's, I think, just a little touch to say, you know what? We are aware that you have repelled the Portuguese who had allied in some measure with John of Gaunt in this attempt to take the throne of Castile. Congratulations on that amazing victory, because it was very decisive. When John of Gaunt's forces arrived to Castile, they had been worn down by disease. And so, along with the mercenaries that had arrived to Castile, the forces of Castile gave them quite a handy defeat. So, at this point, I think Violant is congratulating the King of Castile on successfully fending off that invasion and securing his own reign. The other stuff in this document is very much your standard good tidings. Everybody is healthy, everybody's doing great. We, in this letter, see Violant reverting to her usual phrases about Joan's health, that he is convalescing, right? And buena convalescencia. And tanto. So that is at about, line 10 or something like that. And so here we've got basically no news from Violant being transmitted. It's all just boilerplate formalities. The letter ends with, hey, if there's anything that you would like us to do, just ask. Except allowing mercenaries to come through our land, I think, is somewhat of an implication there. And I think something that this letter functions to do is to remind or update the King of Castile as to, like, the survival of Joan. Because at this point, I think the King of Castile is well aware that Joan has had some very serious health problems. So it's not so much that the King of Castile reading this would, like, actually believe that Joan is having an excellent convalescence. He might not be. He might be. The King of Castile would be like, oh, no way to know about that. But what it does show is that the king is still alive. The update here, the real meaning of it, I think, is just to say we're still going. It's not necessarily going strong, but it's basically periodically checking in, saying this is still a viable reign that we're having here. To the extent that I can send this letter to you and sign it Queen of the Crown of Aragon. So, I would imagine that somewhere in Joan's registers around this time, there's a similar letter to the King of Castile. So they're just sending little, like, pings. That's a great way to think of this. This was a medieval elite ping. Just like we're still here. All right, let's talk about the probata. I don't think there's anything super unusual here. We have Bartolomeo Servent in the first line of the probata. Second line, mandando, maybe? Mando or mandawit. Domine Regina. And then we have facta per, on behalf of. And then we've got in the third line, Joc Hacme Castellane, the name. And then fourth line of the probata, Milite. And then we have Consilie. Oh, wait a second. What is this? It's, Camerlenk. Okay. So the knight, counselor, and chamberlain. So basically, you know, how is this sensible workflow? Like, is this meaning that the queen directly wrote it or dictated it or, is on behalf of the chamberlain? It seems like it would be reversed. Like the chamberlain would be doing it on behalf of the queen. So maybe something about the way the Latin works there has that actual meaning. But if in reality this was the queen on behalf of the chamberlain, I'd have to chew on that for a little while because I'm not sure why why that would be the case, that the queen would be putting this together on behalf of the chamberlain. We don't have La Reina anywhere in this. So there's nothing at the end of the text block. Like sometimes you'll see a name. We've seen a lot of Francescus Sacostus for Joan. Sometimes you'll see La Reina or Rex for indicating a higher level of involvement, maybe even a signature on the document from the king or queen. Sometimes we've got at the top, above the main text block of the letter, La Reina or Lore. We have La Reina at the top of the folio, but that document was from June 11th. So I don't know what to say about the attribution and authorship for this particular document. Well, yeah, you got me. I have no inferences to make beyond what I've already said about the level of involvement. It's really interesting how there just does not seem to be consistency in the way that they will provide these attributions, but I have a feeling like these choices were made not arbitrarily, that there's just all of these gradients in the level of involvement that the monarchs had in the creation of these documents. And that a more systematic examination, and I gotta say, like with the AI, a more systematic examination, looking at it from like a big data perspective, I think would help to really clear that up. Or like working in these documents for like a 20-year period. Okay, let's talk about a couple micro things in the document itself. First of all, I want to point out on line 6, third word in line 6, look at that letter Z. This, I believe, is written on top of an erasure. And I think that it used to be the letter S. So that's an interesting thing, because would somebody, if they are, Z and S, sometimes like the Cedilla is what is mistaken for the Z, but here we have a former letter S. It's interesting. I think Bartolomeo Sirvent is probably not too comfortable in Castilian, in writing Castilian. And so, does this mean that as he was copying it from the outgoing letter, he just kind of went ahead of what he was seeing in the original and was just writing and then said, whoops, or yeah, I'm really curious about the very micro, that moment of accidentally writing S and then saying, oh, got to get that out, and then replacing it with this letter Z, and exactly how that happened, trying to imagine the possibilities there. I almost thought for a moment that it had to do with how it sounds, and that maybe we're seeing a little bit more of like a result of dictation, but I just don't think that that's how what we're looking at here was created. I think it was almost always copied from something that had been previously written. Now, below that, the line below that, line 11, we have a word. It's the fourth word in that really, really stumped me. And it has to do with the letter that's in the middle that to me looks like something like an H. So if you look at the line above at the end of the line, fechos, look at that H that occurs in the middle, and to my eye, I'm seeing something very similar. It's definitely not exact, but I'm seeing a very similar shape, and that is not a letter H. But because I was pretty sure it was a letter H, I got really thrown off by this. And then I made another mistake in the paleography. The third and fourth letters look to me like a C and then a different letter, a T. Those two letters, well, they are written differently, and that, in my mind, indicated that they were different letters. But so I was just like really racking my brains, like really trying to figure out like what Castilian word starts with SUCT and then has an H in it, and there is none. And I was really stumped. So I thought to myself, all right, well, these days I can't use Claude for my usual kind of full transcription, and I didn't need to today anyway because Register 2053 is one of the ones that I put through the OpenClaw pipeline. But anyway, I can use Claude to do something a little bit smaller. So I just took a screenshot of these two lines so I could give it some context. So line 9 and line, oh my gosh, what is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Line 6 and line 7. Okay. And then I gave it my full transcription with the help of the OpenClaw output. So my transcription of these two lines, and I said, look, I have one word that I don't know what it is. And very handily, Claude gave me the answer. And Claude concluded that what I thought was an H is actually the letter D, which really angers me because, like, at no other point in this document do we have a D that looks like that. The ascender of the D, its loop is going the wrong way when it's compared to all the other letter Ds. And I think it has to do with the fact that the D is followed by the letter I. And so in that situation, I think the scribe is sort of forced to make the loop go the other way. I'm not quite sure about that, but that's just a guess. And to be honest, I have seen the letter D written like this. I don't know where, but it doesn't strike me as like an impossibility. And then the other thing that Claude corrected is that the third and fourth letter, well, they're the same letter. They are written differently, but it is two C's. And the word is sucederan or succederan. And so that, means like the things that will ensue, the things that will happen. And so it makes sense with the phrase that begins in the line above, and of the deeds following, or the subsequent deeds, the next deeds, segund, that that are those that will follow, that will ensue. So this is absolutely succederon, but it is written in a way that was incredibly difficult paleographically, and it was Claude that came to my rescue. So I have to admit it. The AI is incredibly helpful to make these breakthroughs when I have worked for a good long while trying to figure out the paleography of a word, and it just seems to be, like I've done everything I can. And so Claude, is where you can go to make a breakthrough. Yeah. All right. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Multcara Companiona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, I've done my job. Remember, the motto of The Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes, and listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. In the meantime, take care